we're going to be jumping right into the future of college football, where we're going to give our preseason top 10. So, Michael, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So, as many know, I started like watching college football this year, a little bit last year started. So, don't hate me for some of these picks. All right. So,
All
my
right.
number 10, I'm going to have Oregon at my
Okay.
10.
That's fair. That's fair.
Now, that I always, like, even before I watched it, they were like big team. They had Justin Herbert on the team. And
Mhm.
I see they get transfers every year, and they're always a solid team. So, they're at 10. Uh, at my 9, I have FSU.
Okay.
Coming off a big season this year, like shocking a lot of people. They did very good, and they're how how many people are going to the draft on their team? Not many, right?
Yeah, not many.
So a lot of their team
A
is
few
still
of
going to
their
be there.
defensive players. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're also getting transfers. I keep saying they get transfers too. So they're building even a better team for next year, and they did amazing. Like who they play in the bowl game again? That was it
Oklahoma.
was Oklahoma, and that was a great game. I was watching that game. That was a very fun game to watch,
It
and
was,
that win
but
was
Oklahoma was only 6-6 this
yeah.
past season. They were
And I was
awful.
just like, yeah, that's a good point. And then my number 8, I have USC. I have them at
What
8,
happened?
and then my 7, I have Tennessee.
Really? Okay, nice, nice.
That was for you. That was for you.
Thank
Not
you.
gonna lie.
I appreciate that.
At my 6, I have LSU. At my 5, I have Penn State.
Okay.
Num- Number 4, Ohio State. Number 3, Alabama. Number 2, Michigan. Number 1, TCU. No, I'm joking. No, I'm joking. Georgia. Georgia at 1. Just kidding.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that for your first kind of official preseason list, that was fairly good. And I think that we actually had most of the same teams. Just a little bit of different order. So I think that like when making this was like where I see each of these teams ending the season, which I think, you did the same thing. But so for my number 10, I have Tennessee. My reason for that is Joe Milton is a great quarterback. The way that he slings the ball is incredible. Like, I don't know if you've seen his clips, but whenever you're trying to get a deep ball to somebody, Joe Milton is your guy. And there's been times in the past when they took Hooker out and they put Joe Milton in just to throw a Hail Mary. He's that guy. The thing is with Joe Milton, that I've watched every time he's played, he's great with a deep ball, not always accurate with a deep ball, and he's not always accurate with his short passes. He has such a powerful arm that when he throws the ball, it's like a bullet, like headed straight to you, and that's not good for the short and medium passes. So he has a lot to work on. I'm hoping that Peyton Manning will kind of work on it with him over the offseason.
Mhm.
But also we could be seeing some Nico Iamaleava action this upcoming season, which I really hope that we do. And I'm excited for the orange and white game coming up in the spring. But another thing, a lot of returners are coming back. We have all three of our running backs coming back. We got Jalen Wright, Sampson, and Jabari Small. They're all returning. Small was second in SEC for most rushing touchdowns for running backs. So I mean, he's coming off a great year. We did lose Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman, two of our top wide receivers. But on top of that, we just picked up Dante Thornton from Oregon, who was heavily sought out in this transfer portal. He was sought out by big names like Alabama, Georgia, all of them, and he ended up coming to Tennessee on Monday this past week. Um, Not to mention, we have upgrades to our secondary. Our secondary was so bad last season. It was some of the worst defense I've ever seen a team play, other than the Kentucky game when we blew them out 44-16 or 44-6. Sorry. That was the only time I saw them play like really good. Also, they played fairly good against Clemson. But the thing is with Clemson, you got, their second strings in. So that's
Yeah.
not saying much. So on top of that, we got four-star DBs coming in and four-star defensive players, and we also got transfers. So their secondary is going to be upgraded, which is going to keep them in the top 10. My number
Yeah.
9, I got Penn State. Penn State, they lost Sean Clifford, their starting quarterback, but last season they put up they put up 11 wins last season. Two of the losses that they had were against both playoff teams, Ohio State and Michigan. So Penn State has a really bright future. Freshman QB Drew Aller is very hyped for the fan base. The fan base loves this guy. Apparently, after he was the top number 2 pocket passer in ESPN's top 300, he was number 2 for that for pocket passing. So they're really excited to see this freshman. They're going to be starting him too, freshman starter at Penn State. But I think he has enough weapons surrounding him. Most of their players were freshmen and sophomores, like Katrin Allen and Nicholas Singleton. So they like this really good team that they had. They really just have to rely on Drew Aller to get them to that next level. And we could be seeing them upset teams like Michigan and Ohio State next year. I mean, Penn State's done it in the past and they could do it again. So also their defense improved a lot last season from their new DC, Manny Diaz. So we're seeing a whole new upgraded Penn State team next year. I truly believe that. Also, they had a big win against Utah in the Rose Bowl. So that gives them great momentum going into the next season. At my number 8, I got Oregon. Bo Nix, he's returning, and Coach Dan Lanning had a very solid first season. I mean, some disappointments here and there, obviously, especially their first game. They lost to Georgia their first game 48-3. So, I mean, that's just another showing of Georgia's dominance. But they landed the number 8 recruiting class in the nation, and they always are like top 10 for their recruiting classes at Oregon. It's crazy. But also their schedule makes it to where they'll be good. Like Oregon's schedule, they're not as hard as other schedules.
Yeah, pretty easy.
The Pac-12 is improving with Colorado, USC, Utah, and all them. It is improving, but Oregon, Bo Nix is coming off a great year for Bo Nix. He was a Heisman candidate. He wasn't the top 4 Heisman candidates, but he was number 6, I believe. So he had a great season that he had, but he's just got to take that next step this next season. This, I believe, is the last year. So he's going to have to prove that he's a quality quarterback going into the draft. So Oregon at my 8. At my 7, I got LSU. Jaden Daniels is returning, as well as all of his O-line. And we talked a lot about this when Brian was our guest. That was fun. Yeah. But also, speaking of Brian Kelly, the head coach, is a good football coach. He proved that he is a great football coach. Everybody doubted him coming out of Notre Dame. You don't play that many people going into Notre Dame, being an independent school and all that stuff. But he proved after getting 10 wins with an SEC team that he's a good coach. First year there. He's a super solid coach. Their hard schedule. The reason I have them at my 7, their hard schedule. Being in an SEC school, they're going to have to play Alabama next season. And after beating them like this previous season, I don't see Alabama losing to them again.
Yeah.
And then also, we'll see if Texas A&M is better this year. I highly doubt it, but I think that Texas A&M will at least get a bowl game this upcoming year. So on top of that, they just need to fill some holes on their defense, but Mason Smith is returning next season after his torn ACL, which will help fill that hole. He was great before he tore his ACL. So they got the hole filled. But at my number 6, I got USC. Sorry, James Draws. I got USC at my 6, but Lincoln Riley's first year was a disappointing one, kind of like Coach Lanning's, but it was successful. Lincoln Riley doing Lincoln Riley things. He had a freaking Heisman come out of his school with Caleb Williams. They got Dorian Singer from the transfer portal, who led Pac-12 in receiving yards at Arizona with 1,105 receiving yards. So, I mean, that's a really big pickup, another big weapon for Caleb Williams since he's returning. Yeah. And there's not much else to say.
Better than he already is.
Yeah, no, he definitely is. And I mean, there is potential that he could be back-to-back Heisman. I really don't think that he deserved Heisman out of the candidates last season. It's just my personal opinion. But I think that he's definitely going to take that step and get USC a little bit higher. Maybe win the Pac-12 this year. That's a potential thing. If they can actually get past Utah, which they can't get past the Utes for some reason. But at my number 5, give me Florida State. Florida State at my number 5, just missing the playoffs. All of FSU's top receivers and running backs are returning, and Jordan Travis is on fire, dude. Their quarterback is on fire. They won their last 6 games. And this was head coach Mike Norvell's third year at FSU, and he won 10 games, and he's on a 6-game win streak, like I mentioned. So, I mean, it's his third year there. He's doing great things. He's getting the culture back at FSU that they so desperately needed. After losing Jimbo Fisher, that was a big culture shock for them. But Norvell got Bell, who was a top tight end in the transfer portal from South Carolina. He's getting Jordan Travis's weapons, which is great.
Yep.
Also, Jared Verse at DB, who's a potential top 10 NFL pick, is returning. So, I mean, you got some solid defensive backs. They're all returning. And they got guys who are going to fill those voids and holes that for the DBs and cornerbacks that are going into the draft. They got these guys. Mike Norvell is a very good recruiter, and you also could see Mike Norvell doing great recruiting at a school like Memphis. You know, whenever he coached at Memphis, he did such a solid job there. It was always a big game between Memphis and UCF. You know, in the previous years.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I'm going to a basketball game tonight, Memphis versus UCF, and that should be a lot of fun. Yeah, no invite. You want to come? You can slide. You can slide. One thing though is whenever UCF does go into the Big 12, I will be rooting for Memphis a little bit more. I have a cousin that's going there next year, and you got to root for a hometown team up in Tennessee. So, you know, Memphis Tigers. We'll see you guys next season. But as for now, we're still enemies. But yeah, so that FSU is at my 5, just so happened missing the playoffs. My number 4, Michigan. Now I'm saying Michigan, but I'm really iffy about this one. The reason I'm iffy about this one is Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh is expected, quote unquote, expected to take an NFL job. So if
I have seen that.
Yeah, you know, his brother's in the NFL, and Jim Harbaugh has had some NFL coaching in the past, but that's for a different subject. I think that if he stays at Michigan is top 4 team. They're the number 4 team. JJ McCarthy and Blake Corum are returning. Blake Corum was a Heisman candidate before he got injured. He could have won Heisman if he didn't get injured. Also, Jim Harbaugh, he's built the culture there. So without him, we could see a little shakeup. But I do think there's still like a lot of good like players that are at Michigan, whether he leaves or not, they could still do good. But Michigan had always had a winning culture. Up until like every year they lost to Ohio State, you know, but now they're on a 2-year win streak against Ohio State. Jim Harbaugh has brought that winning culture back to Michigan. So whether he leaves or not, I still think that they'll be top 10. If he stays, top 4. At my number 3, I got Alabama. And I got Alabama for the sole reason that it's Nick Saban. And Nick Saban is coming off one of his disappointing years. You know what? 2 losses. That's a disappointing year for Nick Saban, which is saying it's saying something, dude. And Nick Saban has always, every time he has a bad year, he comes back the next season and he just kills it. So it's going to be hard to replace Bryce Young, especially with Milroe, who's their second string. He has bad ball security. He really does. But I think that, you know, all the money that's at Alabama, they're going to get him an ideal QB coach to help improve.
They always find a good QB.
They always do. And like in the past, Alabama quarterbacks were so good in college, then they get to the NFL and they suck. But recently that's changed. And I think it's going to still be the same when Bryce Young enters the NFL. I think he'll be a pretty good quarterback eventually. It's also going to be hard replacing defensive players like Toa Toa. I hate that guy. He's a traitor. But anyways, it'll be hard to replace him and Will Anderson Jr. But it's Nick Saban. He's already got his transfers coming. He's already got top 3 recruiting class in the nation. It's not going to be hard for Alabama to get to number 3 again. So that's that. Number 2, give me Ohio State. Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. are returning. Those are their top wide receivers. And Ryan Day is also just a legendary coach so far. Ryan Day has been doing he picked up right where Urban Meyer left off. and Ryan Day has just been playing or coaching at an elite level, and it's been fun to
Yep.
watch. And one thing to mention is like I've seen a lot of things saying if Marvin Harrison Jr. like didn't get injured, um, in the Georgia game, we could have seen an entirely different like national championship, which I truly believe. I
Yeah.
think it would have been way less of a blowout. Um, but you know, the fact that Ohio State came 1 point within beating a great Georgia team is
Yeah.
just super crazy. So Ohio State at 2. Also Ohio State at 2 because no matter what, they're always going to be top 10 with their coaching and their players because they don't play anybody that big. I mean, they're going to be playing against like Iowa and Wisconsin and teams like that, teams that have like no offense. So I mean, that's always going to happen. And somehow sometimes they still find a way to like fall behind those teams, which is kind of funny to watch. But Ohio State at 2. My number 1 for next season, no surprise here, Georgia. They've just been on an elite run lately. And one thing to mention was before this year, they lost 15 of their starters to the NFL draft. 15 before
Yeah.
this year. And they still went unbeaten and they demolished TCU in a national championship game. So whenever they lose players, they're not really losing much. They're just losing like star talent they already had. Georgia got a top 3 recruiting class yet again. And another thing to mention, Thomas and Lovett from Mississippi State and Missouri, they're great wide receivers. They're just new weapons for the sophomore Beck from on Georgia. He was a second string that played a little bit in that game. There's going to be great weapons for him to throw to. Not to mention, Brock Bowers is back. So I mean, Brock Bowers is going to be Brock Bowers, and he's going to be that guy that he's been for the past 2 years. And also, the last thing I want to mention with Georgia, they have easy out of conference games. They got easy out of conference games. One against Ball State. They got UAB they play next year. They got Georgia Tech, which, God, Georgia Tech, Georgia rivalry. It's not even a rivalry at this point. And then they're also playing UT Martin, which is an FCS team. So
Yeah.
Georgia and the number
See them
1
going
isn't going to be
undefeated
hard.
again.
Undefeated? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they'll go undefeated yet again. It's all going to depend on this new sophomore quarterback that they have. If he is going to be like good, if he's going to be accurate and everything, which I didn't really get to see too much of him because he was always given the ball to run. I think that if he does good, then yeah, they go into be unbeaten. I think it all relies on the quarterback next year. It's all going to rely.
Yeah.
They don't got Bennett, they're going to have to rely on this Beck kid to do their best work, and we'll see what happens. So that's my top 10. And that pretty
Good
much
top
wraps it
10.
up for college football 2023 preview. So